All right, let's try something. We're going to pull on what seems like a single, simple thread and watch as this huge, complicated thing, the modern American city, starts to unravel right in front of us. And believe it or not, it all kicks off with one simple but honestly terrifying question.
I mean, that's a question no parent ever wants to have to ask, right? But for millions of people, it's a very real and present danger. And it's not coming from the outside, it's coming from the inside, from the very bones of the buildings themselves.
And that is our thread. It seems so straightforward, so horrifyingly simple. There's lead in the water our kids are drinking at school. But here's the thing. This isn't just a story about old buildings. It's really a symptom of a much, much deeper decay. It's a story about choices that were made over 100 years ago. To really get how we got here, we've got to go back in time, way back, to a decision that seemed purely practical, but wow, did it have some devastating hidden costs. So picture this. It's a century ago, and city planners have a problem. In cities with soft water, the normal cast iron pipes are just corroding like crazy. So what's the solution? Lead pipes. They were way more durable. And you have to understand, this was a purely economic decision. It was all about saving money on maintenance down the line. But of course, we now know the terrible hidden cost. When those lead pipes eventually corrode, they release poison right into the water. So that decision from the past, it's a full-blown crisis in the present day. Decades and decades of underfunding mean cities, and especially their schools, just haven't had the money to replace this aging infrastructure. They are, quite literally, stuck with the poison.
And here's where we start to pull that thread a little bit harder. See, this isn't just some boring maintenance issue. The lack of funding? Well, that's the result of some very specific policies and a huge shift in how and where Americans live.
Okay, so this next part takes us from pipes to policy to the financial decisions that basically starved cities of the resources they desperately needed just to maintain themselves.
35%. Let that sink in for a second. During the 1980s, that's how much federal grants to big cities dropped. Just gone. I mean, imagine if your personal budget was suddenly slashed by a third. What would you let fall apart first? Well, for cities, the answer was pretty clear. Schools, public transit, and yeah, those old pipes.
You can actually trace this cycle of disinvestment over decades. It really kicks into gear in 1974, with a Supreme Court decision that basically walled off suburban tax dollars from urban schools. Then, boom, in the 80s, the federal government turns off the money tap. And the inevitable result, decades later, is a crisis like Flint, where the human cost of all that neglect becomes absolutely impossible to ignore. But this kind of logic, this neglect, it goes beyond just money and maintenance. It actually seeped into the very philosophy of how we designed our communities, especially for the poor.
And that brings us to this really crucial concept from a city planner named Oscar Newman, defensible space. The idea is actually pretty simple. When people feel a sense of ownership over the space around their homes, like a front yard, a quiet street, they take care of it, they protect it, and that's how you build a community.
So on one side, you have these spaces that people feel like they own. But on the other side, you get what's called indefensible space. Think anonymous elevators, unlit hallways, big empty areas that belong to everyone, and because of that, belong to no one. And that is where community and safety really struggle to survive. And here's the real tragedy. In the big rush to build public housing back in the 50s and 60s, planners created these massive, tall buildings that were just full of this indefensible space. The policy, it was meant to help, but the design itself ended up contributing to the breakdown of social trust and community. So we've seen this pattern of neglect in our schools, in our housing. Now let's zoom all the way out to the largest scale, the core infrastructure that is supposed to hold the entire country together. So get this. These are the actual grades the American Society of Civil Engineers gave our country's infrastructure. A C+ for bridges, which, by the way, means about a third of them are structurally deficient. And then there's mass transit, a D. This isn't just one city's problem, you see. This is a systemic, nationwide failure to invest in ourselves. $59 billion. And that's not the total cost to fix everything. Not even close. That's just the maintenance backlog for the country's rail transit. It represents decades of just choosing not to fix what's broken. And look, this isn't some abstract problem. This is the daily reality for millions of people. It's Amtrak trains getting stuck in tunnels, it's Boston's T grinding to a halt in the snow, and it's DC's metro becoming famously unreliable. This is exactly what systemic underinvestment looks like on your morning commute. So, all these different threads we've been pulling, the lead pipes, the school funding, the housing design, the crumbling trains, they all weave together to reveal one single, pretty stark picture of the country today. The source material calls this the dual system. On one side, you have what's called the FTE sector, people in finance, tech, and electronics, who often live in suburbs or luxury city towers. They drive cars, use well-funded or private schools, and are pretty much insulated from all this decay. On the other side, you've got the low-wage sector, living in the cities and relying on the very mass transit and public schools that are falling apart. And this division creates a political problem. When one part of society is insulated from the decay of these big systems, the political will to actually pay for their upkeep just vanishes. I mean, why would you vote to invest in a subway you never ride, or a school your kids will never ever attend? So, it leaves us with this one fundamental question. We've traced this whole unraveling from a single lead pipe to a nation divided. The systems aren't just breaking down. You could argue they're breaking us apart. So what happens next when the very foundations we all ultimately rely on are just left to crumble?